Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here and super, super excited about this opportunity for us as women to come together and to learn and to apply principles and to become stronger and to have courage. And I think back to the beginning of Marc's life, a very difficult time that he came into our life. I was 23. The man that I had married was very abusive and had tried to kill me, and so I went through a divorce. I had a 3-year-old, an 18-month-old, and because of the violence, they waived the waiting period. So 2 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant with Marc. I didn't have any child support. He wasn't active in their life. I could not see any light at the end of the tunnel, and I didn't know how I was going to get through. And I remember in that pregnancy, I had people in my life that said, you can't afford to feed those 2 children that you have. You need to just have an abortion. How are you going to feed a 3rd one? And I think back to Marc. I think back to that hero that he turned into and how different this world would have been. And I'm so glad I didn't make that choice to end his life. And as I said, there was no light at the end of the tunnel. I had no idea how I was going to be able to raise these 3 children, to take care of them, to nurture them, to provide for them. And I didn't have big goals for them. My hope was if no one was a drug addict, no one had been killed in a drive-by shooting, and no one had 5 children by the time they were 18, I was good. And trust me, that was the background of my ex's family. I'm so proud to tell you today that I have 3 amazing children, 11 grandchildren, 1 great-grandson and another one on the way. I am a blessed woman. But it was not easy. I had to persevere. I had to make choices to continue to put one foot in front of the other. It wasn't like I was going to run a marathon and I set my goals for, I was just like one day at a time. Next step, next step, next step. And so on August 2nd, when we found out that Marc had been killed, it was the toughest day of my life. And that morning, I had gone about my day normally. Looking back, I don't even know what was happening, but Marc had died that morning for us. And they had been trying to find me up in Oregon. That was where I lived. That's where I raised my kids. And finally, one of the neighbors, they knocked on their door and they said, she doesn't live here anymore. She moved to Arizona. And I know, Marc had called, got the new address, had all the information, had put that in his paperwork. But as I look back, I see God's hand of protection on me, because if they'd have found me that morning, I'd have been home alone by myself. And like I said, I don't know what I did that day, but I went about my day. And finally, when they found this out, they said, oh my gosh, she's going to find out on the news. We've got to get to this woman before she hears it on the news. And usually in the SEAL community, we have a Keiko team that's in the SEAL community themselves who come and notify you. But because they were up in Oregon and they wanted to get me notified right away, they called Luke Air Force Base here. And they sent someone out, and I wasn't home that night. They knocked on my neighbor's door, and they said, do you know how to get a hold of Debbie? We've got to get in touch with her. He said, well, I don't have her cell phone, but I know her son works down at the Lowe's. So they went down to the Lowe's and found my other son, Christopher. He was a Marine. He served in the military, and he knew why they were there, but they couldn't tell him. And that night, I was actually at my Bible study at my small group, and we were celebrating my birthday, which had been the week before. And as we celebrated that night, my girlfriend gave me one of the willow tree angels. And those are the angels with the wooden wings. And let me promise the slides here. It is, as you see her stance, she's standing like this. And to me, that's strength and that's victory. And as she looked at me, she said, you just remind me of such a woman of courage with all that you've been through in your life, and yet you still love God, and you still serve Him, and you still have such a positive attitude. And little did we know how much more courage was going to be required that night. And as we sat there and celebrated and had cake and ice cream, my phone rang, and I always turn my phone off, but again, that night it needed to be on. And I picked it up, and it was my son, Christopher. Nothing in his voice to alert me. He wasn't freaked out. He wasn't talking fast. He wasn't crying. He just said, "Hey, Mom, where are you?" I said, "Well, it's Wednesday night. I'm at a small group. Why? What's up?" And he said, "You need to come home." Before Marc deployed, he came and saw us, and I remember him leaving that day, and my older son, Christopher, and I out in the front yard as Marc drove away. And I remember telling him, I don't feel good about this. And he said, "Neither do I, Mom. I am not a worrier or a fretter. That is just not in my personality. But something inside me told me that this was not going to end well. It's not like every day that went by and a black car went by my house that I go, oh my gosh, is today the day?" I prayed more for Marc than anything I've ever prayed for in my life. And so when I got that call from my son and he said I needed to come home, I knew what was going to face me when I got home. And I got in my car, and there was a song from my past, and it said, "I put my hope in you, O Lord. Trusting you, I will not be shaken. Knowing that you will see me through, I put my hope in you." And I just sang that song over and over and over in my head. And I got to the main intersection where we live, and there were probably 3 or 4 fire trucks and police cars and ambulances, and the entire intersection was blocked off. And I remember as I pulled up on that intersection, I was like, oh, my house blew up. That's all that's wrong. And trust me, I would have rather lost every one of my earthly possessions and still had Marc. But to this day, I can't tell you how I got back into my subdivision. And when I got back in there, there were no more emergency vehicles. And so I came back to, okay, I know what's going to face me when I get home. And as I turned the corner, I expected a black car to be parked out front. I guess I've watched too many movies because there was no black car. There were no unusual cars parked there, just my son, Christopher, on the sidewalk, pacing back and forth. And I pulled up and parked on the wrong side of the street so I could just get right out. And I got out, and he said, "Mom, the Navy's here." And if you're a military family, you know what that means. If they've been wounded, they'll get you to them. When they come to you, it's not good news. And when he said the Navy's here, I just fell on his shoulder, and he started crying. And I was like, no, no. And we walked inside. And because they'd spent some time in my home while they were trying to find me, I guess I can be hard to find at times. And they said, "We can tell by being in your home, you're a woman of faith. You're going to need to rely on that faith for what we're about to tell you. Your son, Marc Lee, has been killed in action." And if you're a parent, you know that's the most devastating news that you could ever receive. And yet I knew at that very moment that my circumstances had drastically changed. I'd been a widow for 29 years at that point. My second husband had taken his own life. So I'd walked through grief before. I had a glimpse into it. I remember when he died, I wrote in my journal 2 weeks later, what is wrong with me? Why am I still crying? Why have things not gone back to normal? I had absolutely no clue what grief looked like. But at least with Marc, I did. I knew this would be much harder than losing my husband. But even though my circumstances had drastically changed, my God had not. He was still the same God on August 2nd as he was on August 1st. And as we started to get that information, and the guys overseas knew that I'd been notified, I started to get calls from his teammates. And you heard from Jocko how hard that was and how they tried to prepare their hearts as to when they spoke with me, how they would encourage me, how they would comfort me, how they would provide hope. And for me, I was concerned about them. They're still in the combat zone. I'm at home and I'm mushed and I can't make any decisions. But they're still facing life or death circumstances. How are they going to survive? How are they not going to be in a situation where we lose another one? And so it was just natural for me when I talked to them to ask, how are you? How are you guys doing? What do you need? How can I help you? How can I support? And we started to piece together the amazing story of Marc and his heroic actions just on August 2nd. We learned that it was 115 or 120 degrees that day in Iraq. I live here in Phoenix. We've had a really hot summer. We saw a lot of those 115, 120 degree days. But I can guarantee you none of us were out fighting. Marc carried the big gun, so he carried anywhere from 150 to 180 pounds in addition to his own weight. How you do that in that extreme temperature is beyond me. If you saw the movie American Sniper, that battle is showed on the rooftop that day. They took a little licensing in the way they described that. But they'd been fighting for 2 hours. 4 of the SEALs were on the rooftop. Ryan Job had been severely injured. The bullets hit his weapon, so he had shrapnel injuries all over the head. And he fell to the ground. 2 of the SEALs quickly dropped to help Ryan. Marc could have made that very same choice, but his choice that day was to stand up in the line of fire. He had the big gun. He knew he could lay down some suppressive fire. And he put down that fire, hoping they could get the medic up to the rooftop. The medic got up there and he took one look at Ryan and he said, "We got to get him out of here immediately, or there's no chance for survival." So not just once, but then a second time, Marc made that choice again to stand up into the line of fire. He was hoping that he could cover so they could all move Ryan down off the rooftop. They did. They got Ryan down off of there. They sent him off for medical attention. And they climbed in their Bradleys. And they headed back to the base that was named Camp Marc Lee in his memory. In 2007, shortly after Marc died, I got to visit Iraq. I got to go to Camp Marc Lee. I brought back some of the soil from the base of that camp. I got to see where he slept, where he walked, where he worked out. And as they got back to the base, the chief came in and said, "We just found 30 of the insurgents who just attacked us." And without hesitation, Marc looked at his chief and he said, "Roger that, let's go get them." They had done their mission for the day. Because I've been over there, I know there's a Marine base on the other side, a big Marine base. They could have said, "You know what, we're exhausted, we're tired, we've been in a huge battle. Go get some of the Marines that are fresh, gung-ho and ready for battle." But that's not who these guys are. So they climbed in their Bradleys and they headed back to Ramadi. They cleared several houses and they went in the last house that Marc would be in. They cleared the bottom of the house and they started to go up the steps and they heard Marc yell, "On me!" And the guys knew what he was saying. He was saying, "I got the lead on this. You guys follow me." And so they went up those steps, and as he started up those steps, he drew fire through a window. And for the last and final time, he made that choice again to stand into the line of fire. He didn't duck below the wall. He didn't wait for backup. He made that choice to stand up in the line of fire. And it was at that point that he gave his life. And so when we were notified of that, I knew where my strength was going to come from. And as we sat there and discussed some of those things, I've got a small window next to my door where I lived, and I looked out, and my small group, my friends had come. They'd followed me home. And I'm like, "What are you doing out there? Get in here. I need you in here." And my neighbors next door were from New York and very proper, and they told them, no, you don't go in there. You leave her alone. And so when they came in and we shared with them what Marc had done, we cried, we prayed, and we cried and talked about Marc and tried to process through this. And they stayed for several hours, and then they left. My oldest son, Christopher, was there. As I said, he was a Marine. He met his wife in Okinawa. And she would go home then. She has 5 children now, so they don't go home every year. But she would go home every year, and she was visiting her family. Both my daughter and my daughter-in-law had just lost babies the previous year at 5 months in their pregnancy. And they both had just got pregnant. And so my son chose to not tell his wife because of fear of losing another child. How he did that, how he had conversations with her each day and wasn't able to let on or tell her anything, again, shows to his strength and to his character. And that night he said, Mom, I'm going to stay here. I'm like, thank you, son. He said, I'm going to go try to get some sleep. And it was about midnight. I knew there was no way sleep was coming to me that night. And as I said, I'd been a widow at that point for 12 years. And I just wanted somebody to hold me and tell me it was going to be okay. And there was nobody there. But I did know where my comfort was going to come from. And so I went, I grabbed my Bible and I opened it. And it opened to Psalms 27. And it started out, the Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked came against me to eat up my flesh, my enemies and my foes, they stumbled and they fell. Though an army may encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war may rise against me, and I'm reading this going, oh my goodness, did you write this today for me? Because it couldn't have been any better for my circumstances. And the second to last verse said, I would have lost hope if I had not believed I'd see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and I will strengthen your heart. And I may be a slow learner, but I'm not dumb. And I saw that courage thing again, and I've learned that if God asks me to do something, whether it makes sense or not, just do it. And I'm like, okay, God, I get it. I'm going to have courage. I'm going to have to be strong in these circumstances. And I felt so much comfort that night, never visibly seen God, or, I've heard his voice in my head. But I could not have felt like he was there any closer. And the hope and the comfort that I had at that moment was absolutely amazing. And many of us go through different circumstances in life where we face pain. And that pain may be physical pain. It may be emotional pain. It may be pain in our relationships as we raise our children. It may be pain in our marriages. But we may not have a choice, that pain that inflicts us. But we do have a choice how we respond. And my choice was to put on Marc's boots and pick up his weapon and stay in the fight for every man and woman who serves. Stay in the fight for every other Gold Star family member. And it's been a process. And with that faith, love, and courage that Jocko mentioned about Marc, I did that same thing and started our foundation. It wasn't like I woke up one day and went, oh, I think I'm going to start a foundation. I would get a phone call. And the first one was 7 weeks after Marc died, when I received a phone call from Leif. And he said, Momma Lee, I just wanted to let you know, we've taken another casualty. There was an explosion, and that's when we lost Mike Mansour. Still very, very fresh in the grief, but I knew I needed to be there. I knew I needed to be there to support that family. We had amazing support from when we were notified until the funeral. And then I went back home to Arizona. I'm not near the SEAL base. I'm not near that community. Marc's teammates were all still deployed in Iraq. And it was hard. Everybody else went back to their normal life, and I was just beginning my journey of grief. And I'm not a person to have a pity party or feel sorry for myself, but I'm like, I can make a difference for someone else. And so when we got the call about Mikey, I knew I needed to be there. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I needed to be there, and I knew how important it was to be there for someone. And we talk often at Echelon Front about the importance of relationships and how important that is. And I got over there, and they're staying in the same hotel we stayed in when Marc died. The same black cars came to pick them up and transport them that morning. And I was downstairs, and I was talking to the Admiral, and he said, how are you doing? I'm like, I'm hanging in there. And he said, we want you to go with the family in the family cars. I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. This is not about Mark. This is not about me. I'm just here to support this family. And with almost pleading look in his eyes, he said, exactly. That's why we want you in the car. Well, I'll ask you to do something. Yes, sir. And so I got in that car. And as we got up to Fort Rosecrans, that's where Mark's buried. And I got out of the car. And oh, my gosh, it's even the same casket Mark was buried in. And my heart just ripped open again. The only thing I knew different than they knew now was when we received that folded flag, what that's like. And so that was the first occasion. Again, Leif called me one other time. We've had a wounded that's in the hospital in Bethesda. I just happened to be in Washington, D.C. So I was able to get over there right away. I was in his room before he got out of surgery and was there to support the family. So after a while, I began to see, oh, I think I get it. I've got a new mission in life. And I say often, without the pain of losing Mark, I wouldn't have the purpose or the passion that I have now. Without having been a widow, I wouldn't be able to understand the widows who lose as well as the parents. Without having had my husband take his own life, I wouldn't be able to help those veterans struggling with suicide. So through our foundation, we started doing those things, and in 2008, I officially started America's Mighty Warriors. And our main missions are, in response to Mark's amazing last letter home, to do random acts of kindness. He said, when's the last time you paid for a stranger's cup of coffee or meal or tank of gas? So those are easy things that we can all do. Well, the tanks of gas maybe are a little more ridiculous today. It was easy for me to do back then. We've expanded that program where we go up to a $5,000 grant. We recently sent $50,000 to Lahaina to be able to help our veterans who have lost over there. Just yesterday, I received an email from the people that are helping disperse that for us, that they reached out to a veteran who was actually also a firefighter, who while he was fighting the fires, lost his own home. So that's the impact we're making. We do retreats in Texas for Gold Star families. We have a house in Arizona and one in Florida where Gold Star families can come stay. We just love and pamper on them and let them know we won't ever forget you and we won't forget the sacrifice your hero made. Our biggest program is our Helping Heroes Heal program. With that, it's our veterans from combat who have post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. And we're paying for hyperbaric oxygen therapy, hormone and supplement therapy, things that are actually healing them, not just masking the symptoms. I feel like we do a terrible job as a nation, as a government, of making sure that our veterans are taken care of, especially in our Special Forces community. They get the best equipment, the best missions, the best training, and they get done and we're like, bye, see you, thanks. And I feel like that's part of that don't leave a man behind. And so that's why we've decided to do that for them. I know many of you in here support our mission, and thank you so much for doing that. And I think back to the questions that Jocko said when I called that night. How are you? What do you need? And how important the relationships are. And so that's part of this weekend while we're here. We want to know, how are you? What do you need? And we hope that we'll be able to build into you and give you some principles and things that you can learn that will help meet those needs. I think it's so important as women, as we lead, whether it's our own life, whether it's we lead in our home, whether we lead at work, we can bring so much more to whatever environment we're in. I wish I'd have learned better to ask questions when I was a young mom. Oh my goodness. I was a stressed out mom. I was working 2 or 3 jobs. Someone else was basically raising my kids. But that's what I had to do to take care of them. Well, I could have not done the 3rd job. I did have a $400 car payment back then, so my priorities were a little out of whack. And we talk about that. We need to prioritize what's important in our life. And I think as women, sometimes we feel guilty when we prioritize focusing on our children or focusing on our home. We feel like we're less than. Be proud of who you are and where you're at and what you're doing. And I think of Marc often. I think of the impact that he makes. We had one of our SEALs who went through the Helping Heroes Heal program that I mentioned. And I always call and check up to see how they're doing, what improvements have changed. And as I spoke with him, and he said, man, I'm sleeping better. I haven't had any suicidal ideations. My focus is back. And he said, you saved my life. And I said, well, you were willing to give your life for me. This is the least that we can do. And he said, no, stop. I'm like, ruh-roh, made a Navy SEAL mad. This is not going to end well. And he said, I wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for you and your foundation and the therapies you provided. You literally saved my life. And as he said that, so firm and so strong, I thought of Marc on his final actions. August 2nd, standing in the line of fire 3 different times, willingly giving his life to save his teammates. And as I thought of that, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's still saving his teammates' lives. We just passed the 17-year anniversary, and that young man is making a greater mark in this world than if he'd have physically been here. Marc was a believer. I know where he was at. He was redeployed to heaven. And I will see him again one day. But I think of that, and that's our mantra, is make your mark. Definitely made my mark. But Marc made such a greater mark in this world. And every one of us can do that. It doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing. Not everybody's supposed to start Echelon Front like Jocko did and have the worldwide impact he does. Not everybody's required to start a foundation like I did. But we can all make our mark wherever we're at in our world. We can choose to do that. The pain that you're struggling with right now, if you're in that time of pain in your life, make that choice. Make that choice to go do something today. Don't wait till tomorrow. Take that next step. Don't plan to run a marathon right now, but just take one more step. And so I think through the different questions, and one of the things I tell people all the time, if you're struggling, get up before your feet even hit the ground in the morning and find one thing to be grateful for. I remember shortly after Marc died when that thought came to my head to be grateful, and I knew God was telling me to do that. And I was like, are you kidding me right now? I have nothing. I just want to stay in bed and cry, and how can I be grateful for anything? And because my heart was so concerned for our troops who are overseas, he put the thought in my head, do you have hot water in your shower? I'm like, duh, I live in America. Of course I have hot water in my shower. It's like a lot of our troops are on a base where they don't even have hot water. I'm like, oh, so sorry, God. Yes, thank you for my hot water. And there was something that happened as I would do that every day, that later in the day there'd be another thing. Oh my gosh, look at the beautiful sunset. Look at that beautiful rose. Oh my gosh, my grandkids, what a blessing. And I don't know what it is physiologically, I don't know if that's the right word, but why that happens, but there's something that happens when we do that. And then exercise. Do an intense workout exercise each day. I, again, at that point, could not say, yeah, I'm going to run a marathon. No, there was no way that I could have even thought that far. But I'm like, get up, get out of bed, go walk to the end of the driveway. And literally, my driveway is short. The length of my car was about my driveway. And because I'm competitive, then the next day I'm like, okay, walk to the end of the street. Okay, not a big feat either. There was only one house over. But it was a little bit more. Now I walk 5 miles every single day. Without fail. I don't go to bed. I can't do it all at once because my knees don't handle that. and I swim 50 laps in my pool. I feel healthier now than I did in my 30s, just because I made that choice. And you guys have a choice too, not with your feelings, not with our emotions, but with your will. You can say, I'm going to do this. And then go serve someone else. When you're doing things for other people, your focus is outward, not inward on your issues. Not that you ignore the issues, you still need to deal with whatever you're struggling with. But don't get stuck there. And my hope is that for you women here this weekend, you would learn to be courageous women. You would learn to be strong. And you would know where those resources are to help you do that. And I just want to say thank you so much for your time, for being here. We're excited to have you. And go make your mark. Thank you.